sometimes you realize in the edit
what was in
was
your
maybe
mind.
informing you without you realizing it. I try to avoid self-consciously like nodding towards something because it's gonna
you want to feel unique and special, and you're trying to make your film as original as it can be, but I mean you can't avoid having this history of great filmmakers.
No, so it's good to avoid. It's good to try to avoid because it's going to happen anyway.
We're here with Ari Aster, director of Boys Afraid.
Yorgos Lanthimos of Adonis. I love Poor Things. How did you discover the book?
It was almost 12 years ago now. I was just reading in general, trying to find material because by starting to make English language films, like a whole world opened to me that I could maybe look into other material. So I was just reading a lot, and I came across Aleister Gray, and I read quite a few of his books. And I also appreciated his paintings and his illustrations that he did. Some of it is in his books. When I read Poor Things, I was immediately captivated by it, and I looked up to see if it was already made into a film, and I discovered that it wasn't. So I quickly tried to communicate with him and meet him and get his blessing to make it into a film.
You will rejoin the table and you confine yourself to the following 3 phrases. How marvelous, delighted, and how do they make the pastry so crisp, yes?
And I actually went up to Scotland and in Glasgow and met him, and he was very, very generous. He was around 80 years old, very energetic. He took me around Glasgow, showed me the city, and then he sent me off and gave him his blessing to make the film.
Was there ever a point at which he might have adapted it himself?
It was written in the 90s. I think there had been attempts, and I think he'd written a screenplay himself at some point, but it never came to be. At that point, it was not active anymore, any of the attempts. So yeah, it was like years later that I asked him, if I could make it, and just before I met him, he prepared by watching Dogtooth. He was actually telling me how a friend of his helped him to put the DVD on and watch the film. And based on that, he said, I watched that film of yours and I think you're a very talented young man, and it would be great if you wanted to make my novel into a film. And that was it. And we never really spoke since. And unfortunately, he's now died, so he never got to see the film because it took a long time to make. But he was a very special person, an artist and presence. And I tried to kind of infuse a little bit of his spirit. I mean, the novel itself is a lot of his spirit part of the film. But, when we try to think of how Baxter would be, the character of the surgeon, the doctor, like we took elements of him as well. Like Willem has a Scottish accent and some of his mannerisms or the way he spoke, or just to somehow have him in there in certain ways.
Bella, this is Mr. McCandles.
Hello, Bella. Tell me about working with Tony McNamara, because before The Favorite, you were a co-writer on all of your films.
Well, we met Tony the first time on The Favorite. We really got along and it was very pleasant to work together. So Poor Things was already in my mind, but I was having difficulty of even starting the development. Not many people were interested in developing it. But when we started working with Element, the producers that I work with, and we started making The Favorite, then it became more clear that we could, develop this with Tony as well. It just felt the right fit. So while we were shooting The Favorite, he started adapting the novel.
I'm visiting my mother tomorrow. Do you ever wish that she was dead?
What?
You work on, on all of your scripts on your own? Have you ever worked with anyone else?
So far, I've written everything that I've directed, and the next film I'm about to make, I wrote. I've been trying to co-write something for the last few years with a friend, but it always just it's hard for us to focus
Yeah.
on writing together because I think we're used to writing alone.
Yeah.
So far, it's just been on my own.
But it's something that you like to do.
No, it is, but it's a muscle that is developed at this point, and the muscle of working with other people on a script is not developed. So
Yeah.
it's easier to
Yeah.
just do it on my own.
And how long does it usually take for you to write a screenplay? How long did it take for Beau is Afraid?
I wrote the first draft of Beau is Afraid over 10 years ago, and that really came quick. I think I wrote it over the course of like a month. And then rewriting it in 2019, that took about 9 months or so. But,
Okay.
but of just sort of swimming around in it and thinking about it. And yeah, I'm not sure. For me, writing is mostly, walking around and thinking and holding myself back from writing for as long as I can.
So the actual act of writing is quick.
The
The act of putting it on the page, of typing it.
Yeah, well, it's usually it's
handwritten?
me jotting down. Yeah, it's notes, right? I'll be taking notes for a long time until I finally feel that I have something to write. Otherwise, it's just torturous if I sit down and try to force something.
And why didn't you make Beau is Afraid when you first wrote it? Is it because you didn't want to or couldn't?
No, there was a period during which I thought it would be my first film. I remember giving it to a producer that I went to school with, and then she sat me down and said, "Yeah, this is nice, but do you not want to make a movie?" Yeah, it was impossible to get any traction. And I realize now that, I was trying to get it made for like $5 million, and there's no way I would have been able to do it.
And is the rewrite after so many years vastly different to the original that you'd written, or not that much?
No, I mean, the first section is exactly as it was. Nothing changed there. The suburban section is pretty much the same. The forest section where he enters the play, that's almost entirely new.
Okay.
The last section where he goes home is mostly the same. And then the trial at the end is all new.
New.
Yeah.
So did you envision it as having this structure it had these very different parts in it?
It was always like an adventure film where he goes from world to world, and the tone would shift. And the one thing that was kind of tying everything together was that every world was terrible, and he was fucked in each one. That was constant. But the first version was much stupider, and I think maybe funnier. Like I was only concerned with having it be funny, and I think when I rewrote it, it was about making it sadder.
Hey, Kai. Welcome back. Thought you'd sleep in, huh?
Roger's a very respected surgeon. He's the one who dressed and treated your wounds.
You're a lucky man.
I want to ask you about your work with Emma Stone. It started with The Favorite. You've now made 3 films together.
And we've shot a 4th one.
A 4th one already?
I'm counting the short silent film that we did for the
Right. Okay.
the Greek National Opera and Neon organization together. So we made that as well.
She's so great. In this film in particular, I've seen this twice. The first time I saw it, I loved her performance, but was so kind of lost in the tapestry that I didn't quite see how tricky what she was doing is. And watching it again, I was able to see that every scene is like another step in this woman's development. She does this amazing thing where she's kind of a clown in the beginning, and by the end, she is like the emotional anchor for the film. And watching it again, it really snuck up on me. It snuck up on me both times, but I was surprised again that by the end, I was really, really moved by the film, but it never abandons the absurdity. It stays pretty clinical, and it's always funny. It's never not funny.
I've been a whore, you understand. Coxed for money inside me. You okay with that? Does the whoring thing challenge the desire for ownership that men have?
There's this really lovely, like, melancholy, and at the same time, it's always grotesque. I don't know. It's really kind of a magic trick, and I love the film and really love what she's doing here.
It's good, I guess, that you don't notice it on the first view, that it is tricky. Then I guess when you start like looking more into the details of it, you realize. I mean, it was scary because I don't think a character that like this ever existed before, and so we didn't know how we were gonna approach it. And it read great on paper, like it was very funny, and it felt like a very unique character, and there was a progression and an evolvement there on the page. But it was, when you start to think, okay, now we have to do it, we have to make it real. It was a little bit scary, and it's basically her. I mean, you can't help an actor deal with such a complex character, both emotionally but physically as well. You can't show them how to do it, you can't tell them. And in any case, the way I work in general, but why we have, this great relationship with Emma Stone, is because we can just get on with it and do things and try things without having to discuss too much about it. And we understand each other with a gesture or a look or it's very quick how we respond to each other and how we communicate. So that helps a lot. And we trust each other and we admire each other. And it just helps to feel safe and just try things. And, if something fails, you can, you have the other person to protect you. Either I fail and she's there to make it look all right, or, she might have a moment which is not on point and I can, take that away. And this one was particularly complicated also because we didn't shoot in sequence. So she had to track this development of the character physically, emotionally, in terms of language, everything. Especially in the beginning of the shoot, we shot the beginning of the film that takes place in London, but also the ending because we had to wrap up the London set and move on. So she had to go from the beginning of the film to the end of the film, and that's like a huge leap in the character's journey. So it was very tricky. And what we did practically, what we did was, in order to help her, we sat down together and we basically divided the script into the stages of her development. So we went from, scene 1 to 15 is stage 1. Bella is stage 1. From then on to 27, it's stage 2, and so on. So at least, and then we rehearsed that. We rehearsed the movement, the walk, how she spoke, the gestures, everything. So we went like, okay, this is stage 1, this is stage 2, this is stage 3. And at least she had that as a map when we were filming, that she'd know, okay, now this scene is stage 3, so this is how I am. But of course, that's only like a little part in what she had to do, and it's just
because you feel stages within the stages.
Yeah,
you feel it's really
of course.
so
I mean,
incremental.
it's very subtle, and so then that's all her. Yeah. I didn't even realize it when we were filming it, how detailed and the level of that she evolves within the stages and the scenes, and I could actually observe that while I was editing and just seeing the different takes and how it changed from one to the next and from scene to scene and putting it together, and that's where you see her genius and how and realize that you cannot help an actor on that level, and she's just she's great, and I couldn't imagine the film without her.
Yeah, no, she's amazing.
Duncan Wedderburn.
Bella, where were you? You disappeared.
I did not. Nobody can just disappear.
What?
Can they? Disappear?
Talk to me about Joaquin Phoenix.
I sent Joaquin the script just after I had finished rewriting it. So he was attached before we took it to A24. Yeah, it was sort of a long courtship. I sent him the script. He wrote me back saying, "Why would I do this?" And then
It's a good question.
Yeah. I just won the Oscar. Why would I do this? So got on the phone with him.
Did you give him very specific reasons?
Yeah, I argued why he should do it. And then he said, "I don't know." And then we talked again about that. It was something like 15 conversations.
Okay.
that led to him tentatively maybe agreeing, don't count on it. So he was attached. You know, having now worked with him, I understand why he is so reluctant to jump onto anything, because he really puts all of himself into whatever he's doing. And we're gonna do another film together, and I'm really excited about it because it really was the best experience I've ever had with anybody. Not only in that he devotes so much of himself to whatever he's doing, but the way that he challenges the material, the way that he challenges any given scene, and not in a gratuitous way or in a way that's a pain in the ass. It's always, is there anything we haven't considered here? Like, is there anything left? And it's easy to not ask yourself that when you're making something, because it's so hard to make a film and you get so lost in the process. And so having somebody who just forces you to stop and look at what you're doing and say, is there anything else here, is huge. And I realized that it's something that I was really wanting from an actor. And now I can't imagine making a film without it.
Well,
So that, yeah, it was really, really great.
when did you realize you want to do the next one with him? Was it during the first one or after?
While I was making the film, there was a feeling of like, I want to do this again. I want to keep doing this. I had already written the script and I hadn't thought of him in that part. But then by the time we were done, it was just clear, like I have to, he can't, like, you know, he fits, like he could do it. So I'm going to give it to him and see if he wants to go with me.
This time around, was he easier to agree to making it?
Yeah. But still, the questions are always there, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
Help me! 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 Help me!
You know, we have intimate scenes, we have sex scenes. The way we approach it is, you know, use an intimacy coordinator. I don't know if you did, which to me, it helped a lot.
Yeah.
But I think that's like with any kind of, you know, department, if you have like a good person who's good at their job, like you find that it helps. But that role, because it's new in films, could, you know, scare some people, like think that someone is going to be involved in the creative, you know, aspect of it.
It's a mediator.
Yeah, like a mediator. But I found that if they do their job, you know, well, and they care about what it is that they're doing, and they understand the, you know, the subtleties and the differences of, you know, it's filmmaker and it's different film, and I think it can be very helpful because it, you know, it makes everyone much more comfortable.
Yeah.
And, you know, they can address whatever it is that might be an issue. And also I found practically, for instance, when filming sex scenes, we don't really know necessarily, you know, what looks, you know, good or normal or realistic or whatever it is that you want to make. You don't necessarily have the experience of how you do something, and at the same time the actors feeling comfortable. So in that regard, Elle McAlpin that we had on Poor Things, for example, she was extremely helpful in, you know, getting everybody comfortable, but also achieving, you know, a certain kind of, you know, tone even in the sex scene. So I don't know how you find working with an intimacy coordinator.
We had one on Beau is Afraid. We didn't have one on Midsommar. Was it a thing at that point? I mean, we were in Budapest. I don't think it was. I think we would have had one there if it was a thing. Mandated.
If it existed, you mean that role at that point?
It might have existed, but it wasn't mandated at that point.
Early
I don't know.
days.
Yeah, I definitely found it helpful. I mean, you know, in the end, it's a scene you have to choreograph, and I found that the mediation that they bring was useful and takes some of the anxiety off. But Parker and Joaquin were really game, and it's a brave thing. And I think a big part of it is having it be clear
Yeah.
in the script what it is so that they can decide on their own, is this something I am willing to do, and is it something that I can get my head around? Because to a degree it is a conversation, but it's a choice that they have to make before they take the part.
I think they get it the way they get, the rest of the material and the characters, and they understand if it's essential to the story that you're telling. And after that, I don't think there's like a huge conversation to have. If they get it, they get it, and they just do it. And then it's about the details and how you choreograph it, as you say, and what makes sense for the character or the story or the particular moment. So I don't find it such a huge issue after you have a specific script and project and story, and the actors get it overall, so they're.
But the set becomes I mean the set becomes much more sensitive when you're doing those. It is different,
which I like, because I mean a lot of I love working on very quiet sets with very few people. And when you have these intimate scenes, and it's a sensitive set, as you say, you can actually, everybody gets it, and that there should be the least amount of people possible, and that's like very beneficial to the atmosphere on set. So
it becomes more reverent.
So Emma and I always go like, why don't we film every scene like that? Why don't we make every scene a closed set, no matter what it is? So at least we're just here, concentrate on what we're doing.
There are no extra takes. You get what you need and then you move. I mean, that's what I found. But that's also an anxiety that comes up in me, where it's like I don't want to ask anybody to do anything more than they
want to
need to here. Yeah. But then sometimes you need more than you want to ask for.
Men are blind. That's not a criticism, that's their charm. Don't be defensive. I'm proud of the man you are.
Speaking about like small sets and intimate, at the same time, I think both of us and you made the biggest scale films we've made so far. And I was wondering whether, you had envisioned Beau in that scale from the beginning, or because you were able to make that scale of a film, it became bigger, and how you dealt with the size, and if it allowed you to stylize it in a certain way that you couldn't have before.
I didn't have a sense of how big the film was as I was writing it. It felt so like energy based that I hadn't actually considered the actual scale of what we had to do practically. Then we did a budget and we talked about what it needed, which was a lot more than I had anticipated. The budget's never enough.
Yeah, I know.
But what we needed was more, and that was my experience on the first two films. So it was sort of the same thing, where it's like, okay, we need to squeeze as much as we can into this, or rather squeeze as much as we can out of the allotted budget. I think what started occurring to me pretty early on, once we moved into prep, was, oh right, this is a totally invented world, and so I want to pack it full of as many details as possible. And that, I think, is where it kept ballooning, was I kept having new ideas for, I want this in the background, I want this guy over here, I want to have this shop on his street. And that was the joy of making the film and creating this totally invented world, but it was also the thing that I think drove everybody crazy, was that the film was never finished. Like I was adding things up to the morning of shooting whatever scene we were on. But again, I mean, that really was so fun, and I want to do it again. The world in Poor Things is also this invented fantasy land. I mean, they go to Lisbon, but I've been to Lisbon and it doesn't look like a cheesecake factory. I'll rephrase that. I've been to Lisbon and it doesn't look like that.
As soon as I read the book and imagined how it would be to make it into a film, I immediately thought that it should be, her journey, and she would be the main character, because in the novel she actually I mean, she is the main character, but she's basically seen through other people's eyes, and she's described by other people. And I knew from the beginning that I wanted to make a film about her, and she will drive it, and she'll be the main character. So I felt from the beginning that we had to build this world that kind of reflected her way of seeing things. So it couldn't be, totally realistic. I started thinking about like old school filmmaking and how, they made films and sets that there were, like even exteriors, you made it into a set in a studio. Fellini films or Powell and Pressburger and all those kind of films. And then I thought, but we have, like modern technology as well, and how do you use that but maintain that kind of more, tactile, handmade, hand-painted, feeling of everything. But I didn't know exactly what it would look like. So it took a while. We put together a production design team early on and a costume designer on it in order to do research and be inspired by stuff like looking at paintings, photographs. We looked at films as well, like very different films in how they approached this kind of film. And yeah, we just came up with a version of its place, like a version according to how she would perceive the world in a sense. And Alexandria all of a sudden is like a little island next to another little island connected by, cable cars which is nowhere near, reality. But I just felt like it represented, a very particular point of view, and it was very important to in how you're telling the story.
Yeah, it was very similar in Beau's. The idea was to be inside of the sky, and the world he was inhabiting was just a projection of how he saw things. That's really, that's funny.
And how do you make decisions about how you're gonna film something, like how your style progresses from one film to the next? How much is it related to the story, but also how you feel about the things that you've done and the things you want to do? How does it work that you reach a point where you go like, this is how I want to film this?
My first two features, I shot-listed everything before I went to the crew, just so I have the fullest movie in my own head, so I know how to talk about it. And what I found was I really stuck to that. It was pretty stringent. And I had I can't rewatch my films, but if I ever did stumble into one of my films and found myself rewatching something, they started to feel really like just rote, kind of, there's something dead about them, where it's like, yeah, I just executed the plan here. And I was sort of dictating blocking and not making myself open to new ideas. I think just because I was nervous, right? I just wanted to make sure I had a plan and I stuck to it. And then on Beau, I knew I wouldn't be able to do that with Joaquin, and that was enticing to me, the idea of kind of throwing things away a little bit. And I still came in with a shot list, and I knew how I would shoot everything, but I tried to never impose blocking on him and kind of, and then and see what he would do without that being dictated. And I found that a lot of the time he would end up doing what I anticipated he might do, but then sometimes he would do something really surprising. And I guess the experiment was, can I adjust on a dime on the day? And I found not only that I was able to, but that I liked that way of working, and I prefer those scenes to the ones that I just mapped out and I stuck to the plan. But how about you? Because I'm seeing your style evolve with each film. I mean, I know you've been working with Robbie Ryan for these last two films, and even what you're playing with, is that a 6mm lens? Like what is that lens?
Yeah, this time around it was also a 4mm lens.
Yeah, so if anybody else did that, it would be so self-conscious and garish, and it would not. The fact that you're able to do that, and it feels so cohesive with the rest of what you're doing. It's really great, and nobody else should try.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not cohesive from the beginning. I mean, you just need to, try things out and see how they work and find the balance. For us, it's just like building a language, like a filmic language, and discussing early on, like what it is that we want to do, like what lenses do we want to use, what kind of movement, or do we want to use movement, or in Poor Things there's a lot of zooms as well that might be a little subtle within the whole construction. So we just decide on these tools or these words or this language, and then slowly, because you don't have the luxury of trying them out a lot before you actually start filming, I think in the process of filming, you just get to know them more and more, and then you're able to make more specific decisions.
Yeah.
And then the earlier stuff, like you can mold more during the editing. So you may shoot a little bit more in the beginning just to refine that language that you're discovering, with your DP. Also, we never, like shot list or storyboard anymore. I guess maybe early on I did that, but it was always just to, again, set up this language and the intention. But then I always, went on, because also all of my films before Poor Things, we shot on location. So a lot of it had to do with that. So you go on location and, you rehearse with the actors and, figure out how you want to shoot a certain scene. But I find that's the most efficient way for us to create, this kind of filmic language.
This and The Favorite feel like really liberated and intuitive in a way that I guess all the films do feel that way. But you mentioned you're using zooms here, but you're using zooms in The Lobster, and then a little bit more, I don't know if the word is confidently or just more playfully with Killing of a Sacred Deer.
That's true, yeah.
And I noticed that in Killing of a Sacred Deer, all of a sudden you do have the camera that's like revolving around your characters, and then it feels like that you go even deeper into that with The Favorite. And now here it just feels really muscular filmmaking. Like it doesn't feel in any way undisciplined, but it does feel like an artist who's free and who's on set just able to go with it.
At the same time, it's funny that you say that you had to remain kind of open and free, because watching it feels more structured, that like the shots feel even more structured than your previous films and more determined in a way. And they're like longer shots, if I'm not mistaken. So it's funny, that you said like you had to be more open, and at the same time it evolved to something like that. So tell me, like, do you rehearse like with Joaquin? What was the process? Did you rehearse before shooting, or on the day of the shoot do you rehearse, or how does it work?
The worlds kept changing, so we had about 10 days in each world, or sometimes 5 days in any given world, and so we would go to that location each weekend, whatever that location was going to be, and work through the big scenes together. And so that made it so that I then had a few days to come up with a way to shoot that scene. And there were some scenes where, his action is so clear that he doesn't really have any choices. And those I could map out in advance, like him going downstairs and running across the street to get the water, and then running back. All of that, was mapped out and storyboarded. I mean, in some ways, a big thing I learned on Hereditary and Midsommar was I didn't do any coverage there. I don't get coverage. I hate coverage, but everything is sequenced, and so many scenes in those first two films were oneers that if I was going to keep the scene, I have to, I'm not going to break into the shot late. I'm not going to break out of it early. And so a scene that maybe, where the information deserves at most, 5 seconds, I'd be locked into a 45-second shot, and that was just, in some ways, a lack of discipline, but also just I hadn't ever thought like, oh right, I'm gonna have to pack this movie into this runtime, and so it just became really, really difficult in the edit to shape the films. And so on Beau, I think I was more aware of that. I mean, the film is still, it's 3 hours long. It's too long. Too long. I mean, it's long, but we always knew that it was going to land in that area. I thought maybe 2:45, but we, you know.
Did you know from writing it that it would be long, or while you were filming it? You realized?
Well, the script was, no, Midsummer I learned while filming it, like, oh shit, this is a 4-hour movie. And it's you know, a bunch of dipshit kids going to Sweden and getting killed one by one. It's like, this should not be a 4-hour movie. The script for Beau is like 167 pages. I knew that it was going to be somewhere between 240 and 3 hours.
By the way, Beau, not for the dinner table, but I noticed when you first came in, your testicles are significantly distended.
Who are some filmmakers that you grew up loving and feeling particularly inspired by and excited by? And
well, I didn't really grow up with the filmmakers that I admire today. Like really young, you know, I loved Bruce Lee films. And do you remember Bud Spencer and Terence Hill, those westerns, those, like funny westerns? You know, those are the kind of films that I grew up with. And of course, you know, there was, you know, Jaws and Rocky and, you know, those kind of films. That's what I watched and grew up on. I was not like a, you know, like an intellectual young kid. But then when I went to film school, I got to know, you know, a lot more. And the funny thing is, like, some of my favorite filmmakers, you wouldn't necessarily, from the films that I make, like one of my favorite filmmakers for sure is John Cassavetes. And you couldn't say that, you know, my films, at least
maybe Love Streams.
Yeah, obviously, directly, you know, you can see the influence. But I think, you know, it goes a long way. Like admiring a certain kind of filmmaker or a certain kind of films, it's not necessary that you'll see that influence on the surface. But obviously, there's, you know, a lot more going on, you know, subconsciously. But you know, other than John Cassavetes, there's Robert Bresson that I love and moves me very much. Did you have any specific films or filmmakers while you were making Beau is Afraid?
For Beau, yeah, there were a lot of books, a lot of like picaresque novels like Candide and Tristram Shandy and Don Quixote and Kafka. You know, it's
so more literary than
but you know, Playtime by Tati was.
I was gonna say that. Like I kind of thought of that in that scene where he's walking out in that exterior with all the different
all the
things
characters
going on and the characters and
it was. I mean, that's where Playtime was an inspiration to me. That entire like first section in the city.
Yeah.
Just making sure that every background actor had a thing, you know, and was a character. Sometimes you realize in the edit
what was in
was
your
maybe
mind.
Informing you without you realizing it.
It's
I try to avoid self-consciously like nodding towards something because it's gonna.
You want to feel unique and special, and you know, trying to make your film, you know, as original as it can be. But I mean, you can't avoid having this history of great filmmakers.
No, so it's good to avoid. It's good to try to avoid because it's going to happen anyway.
Yeah.
And then 8.5. I'm always thinking 8.5, especially because of the freedom of what he's doing with the camera and the actors and the blocking, and it's such a carnival, that movie. I mean, that's really him at the peak of his powers. Like he kind of stays in that zone for a while with Juliet of the Spirits and Amarcord, but it's never as robust as what he did there. But especially in this film, I was thinking about trying to channel that.
Fellini's a nice closing. I was thinking a lot of the ship sails on.
Oh my God, yeah.
And we actually have a shot in Poor Things where she's trying to get the money to the poor people in Alexandria, and you have this wide shot of the boat and the two sailors sitting there. That was like a very similar shot like that in Fellini's with a boat, and we basically, stole that.
That's as far
From
as he
there.
ever went with artifice. I love what he's doing with the water in that movie.
Yeah.
It's so, yeah, I see that, absolutely.
Great.
All right.
That's it.